All right, guys, last video, I swear. So, a little bit of practice with graphing and creating these equations based on that focus and directrix that you've been spending time working on. So, again, that equation that we're dealing with, we're going to focus just on vertical parabolas for now until I come back on Friday. This is our equation. So, we know what h and k are based on our vertex, so we can plug those into our equation. And what we can use the focus for is to figure out what P is. Now, in case you hadn't figured it out in the course of your research and the videos so far, P is always the distance from our focus to our vertex. So in this case, I went from my vertex to my focus, I went up 5. So that means P is 5. So if I plug in the information I know, I now have 1 over 4 times 5, which is 20, x minus 0 squared plus 0. So, written out my equation. When I graph, I know my vertex is at 0, 0. I know my focus should be up here at 0, 5. I know my directrix would have to be at negative 5 then. And my parabola ends up looking something like this. What I'm going to be asking you to do in the meantime is basically just come up with the equation. You're not going to have to graph a ton yet. So, trying again. Y equals 1 over 4p, x minus h quantity squared plus k. I can plug in my vertex in for h and k. And then the distance to my focus is p. But what about to my directrix? Well, that's negative p, because I had to go downwards to get to that directrix. So if our distance here is negative 3, that's negative p, that means p would have to be positive 3. So my equation would end up being 1 over 12 x minus h plus k. Now, that might have been confusing for you. So remember when we talked about our parabolas here, what we said was that, so here's our parabola, our focus, put our focus in a different color up here, this distance is p, and then the distance to the directrix is also p, but it's a negative p because we're going down away from our vertex instead of up into our parabola. So this distance to the focus is positive, distance to the directrix is the negative version of it. So the distance here was negative 3, meaning this distance is negative 3. So then that would mean that p itself would have to be positive, which is how I got that equation. So we're going to try that with a couple more before I send you on your way to try a couple on your own. So I'm telling you the focus is at 5, 8, the directrix is at negative 3. Sometimes I like to just draw a picture for myself so I know what I'm talking about here, because I might throw in some horizontal parabolas in the future. So 5, 8 will be up here. My directrix is down here at negative 3. Now, the vertex must fall exactly in the middle somewhere, so that the distance from my vertex to my focus is p, and then the vertex to the directrix is negative p, meaning these distances need to be the same, just opposites. So the first thing I would want to do is figure out how far apart are my two pieces here. So how far is it from my line to my focus? In this case, it's 11, which means that half and half would be 5.5 in either direction, which puts my vertex at 5, 2.5, because I took 8 and took away my p-value, which was 5.5, and I got there. So when I set up my equation, y equals 1 over 4 times that 5.5, x minus 5 squared plus 2.5, coming from our h and k values of our vertex that we just found. Now you could simplify that, I just don't have a calculator handy to do it. One more time. So drawing out a little picture for myself, my focus is at negative 1, negative 2. My directrix is at 0. That means the distance here is 2, meaning my vertex must be exactly in the middle. at 1. So my vertex is at -1, -1. That would mean that P has to be -1. Wait a minute, why is P negative? Well, it's because to go from our vertex to our focus, we had to go downwards. So when I set up my equation, 1/4 times -1, x minus a -1 plus k, in this case -1, or y equals -1/4 x plus 1 squared minus 1. I want you to try, I'll go back for a second. So what you would need to do in these cases is use the focus and directrix or whatever information I gave you to draw a picture and find your p-value. That's the first thing you're going to want to do. Figure out the p-value. Then you're going to set up your equation using h, k, and p. So I want you to try these 4 problems. I don't necessarily want you to graph them yet, and just come up with the equations. So using the vertex and the focus, vertex and the directrix, or the focus and the directrix, see if you can set up the equations. Again, that format was y equals 1/4 p x minus h squared plus k.